1557 AD Antwerp, Philip II of Spain suspends all debt payments. The king of the most powerful empire on earth, ruler of territories from Peru to the Philippines, cannot pay his bills. He owes German and Italian bankers the equivalent of 60% of Spain's entire GDP. This is not a temporary cash flow problem. This is the first sovereign default in modern history. But here is the absurd part. At this exact moment, Spanish ships are unloading silver from the mines of Potosi. Enough silver to mint money for all of Europe. In fact, 40% of Spain's revenue in some years comes directly from American silver. Philip II controls more precious metal than any ruler in human history. And yet he is bankrupt. Over the next 42 years of his reign, Philip will default 3 more times. 1560, 1575, 1596. For bankruptcies in 4 decades. His successors will add 9 more. Spain will default 13 times in total, earning the distinction as history's first serial defaulter. An empire drowning in silver somehow cannot stay solvent. But here is what makes this different. This was not bad luck. This was not incompetent accounting. This was a deliberate financing strategy. Philip borrowed knowing he would default. Bankers lent knowing they would be restructured. The bankruptcies were built into the system. They were features, not bugs. And the model worked so well that Philip ruled the largest empire in the world while defaulting every decade. How did Spain borrow 60% of GDP while defaulting 4 times? And why are we watching the exact same pattern play out right now with Argentina's 9th default? This is the story of Spain's serial bankruptcies. By the end, you will understand the 7-step pattern of sovereign default. See how Philip invented the modern debt trap, and recognize the warning signs flashing in emerging markets today. This is not just history. This is a warning. It is 1556, Brussels. Charles Quinta Abadie Gates. He has ruled the largest empire since Rome. Spain, the Netherlands, Naples, Milan, the Americas, the Philippines. But he is exhausted, bankrupt from endless wars. He splits the empire. His brother Ferdinand gets Austria and the Holy Roman Empire. His son Philip gets everything else. Philip II inherits an empire and a mountain of debt. His father borrowed heavily from the Fugger and Welser banking families of Germany. Those loans funded wars against France, against the Ottomans, against Protestant princes. Now Philip must repay them, but the treasury is empty. Within 1 year, Philip makes his first fateful decision. He declares a payment stop. Walk through Antwerp in 1557 and you smell crisis. This is Europe's financial capital. The bourse, the stock exchange, is in chaos. German bankers realize Spain cannot pay. Italian bankers scramble for information. Merchants who accepted bills of exchange suddenly find them worthless. Credit freezes. Trade collapses. Both Spain and France, locked in rivalry, have bankrupted themselves fighting each other. In this world, sovereign debt is a new invention. Medieval kings borrowed occasionally. But Philip is different. He borrows systematically, continuously, at scale. His debts equal 60% of national product. No ruler has ever accumulated foreign debts like this, and no ruler has ever defaulted on such scale either. Philip inherits a war machine that costs more than his kingdom earns. Military expenditures account for more than 60% of the Spanish crown's spending. Philip is at war every single year of his 42-year reign, against France, against the Ottoman Empire, against Dutch rebels, against England. War in early modern Europe is expensive. Success requires maintaining large armies across vast distances for extended periods. To most people, this seems unsustainable. The skeptics are right. But Philip has discovered something that will sustain his empire for 4 decades despite the mathematics. A new financial technology. Short-term loans called agentos. Meet the Genoese bankers. After 1557, they replaced the German Fuggers as Philip's main creditors. Families like Spinola, Grimaldi, Centurion. They understand something the Germans did not. Lending to sovereigns is not about getting repaid. It is about maintaining the relationship. They develop a sophisticated system. Lend short-term at high rates. Accept periodic restructuring. Extract long-term profits from ongoing business. The agentos work like this. Philip needs money to pay his armies in Flanders, the Low Countries, but physically transporting silver from Spain is slow and dangerous. The Genoese offer a solution. They advance cash in Antwerp or Brussels. Philip repays them in Spain, usually with assignments against future silver shipments or tax revenues. The interest rates quoted range from 8 to 20%. The actual returns, after accounting for periodic bankruptcies, average 4 to 8%. Still profitable when risk-free rates in Genoa are 2 to 3%. But here is the hidden mechanism. The agentos are not really loans, they are insurance contracts. Philip pays a premium in normal times. High interest rates, favorable exchange rates for the bankers. In return, when times are hard, Philip can restructure, reduce principal, defer payments. The bankers accept this because the long-term relationship is profitable. Meet Francesco Lecaro. He is a Genoese banker operating in Spain. He lends to Philip through multiple agentos. He knows the system. When Philip declares a payment stop, Lecaro is not surprised. He negotiates. He forms coalitions with other bankers. They collectively refuse to provide new loans until Philip settles the old ones. This gives them leverage. Philip needs the transfer services. His armies cannot function without payments. So Philip negotiates. Eventually, he converts short-term agentos into long-term bonds called juros. The juros are Spanish government annuities. They pay 5 to 7% interest annually. They are backed by specific tax revenues. The Cortes, Castile's parliament, must approve the taxes. This makes juros more secure than agentos, but they also tie Philip to paying interest forever. By the end of his reign, debt service more than triples even as revenues double. Philip is running faster just to stay in place. What none of them know yet is that this system will allow Philip to borrow more while defaulting more than any ruler in history. He is inventing the sovereign debt trap, 1558 in Potosi, Peru. At 13,000 feet elevation, the richest silver mine in history operates around the clock. The Cerro, the rich mountain, contains more silver than Europe has seen in a millennium. 50,000 miners, many forced indigenous laborers under the meta system, extract the ore. Mercury amalgamation makes processing efficient. Output explodes. Between 1560 and 1600, silver worth roughly 300 million ducats arrives in Spain from the Americas. In peak years during the 1580s and 1590s, these imports exceed 40% of crown income. During Philip's reign, on average 1 ducat of every 5 in revenue comes from the Indies. This is enormous, unprecedented, game-changing, except it is not enough. At first, the silver seems like salvation. Philip inherits debt, but he also inherits the richest silver deposits on earth. He can pay his creditors with American treasure. This will work for a while. But Philip's expenditures grow even faster than his revenues. Wars are expensive. The Dutch revolt begins in 1567. Philip sends the Duke of Alba with an army. The costs are staggering. Troops must be paid. Supplies must be purchased. Communications must be maintained across thousands of miles. The mechanics of Spanish imperial finance depend on timing. Silver fleets arrive from America in August, usually, but military expenses occur year-round. Soldiers need pay in January. Suppliers need payment in March. Philip cannot wait for the silver. He needs money now. That is where the agentos come in. The Genoese advance money when Philip needs it. They take repayment when the silver arrives. They earn profit on the spread. This works as long as the silver keeps flowing, and it does. For decades, production from Potosi reaches peak levels in the 1590s. Spain is drowning in silver. Yet somehow Philip is still drowning in debt. Here is the paradox. More silver means more spending. Philip uses the anticipated revenue to justify more borrowing. The Cortes approve higher taxes against future silver receipts. The Acento contracts multiply. Between 1566 and 1600, Philip enters into 435 agentos with his bankers. By 1598, debt service consumes 44% of total revenues. For every ducat that comes in, 44 cents go straight to creditors. Then it accelerates beyond anyone's control. The irregularity of silver arrivals creates crises. Delays happen. Storms at sea, piracy, administrative problems. When a fleet arrives late, Philip's cash flow collapses. He cannot pay salaries. He cannot fund military operations. He needs emergency liquidity. The only source is more agentos at even higher rates. By 1574, Philip faces catastrophe. The Dutch revolt is consuming vast resources. The war has lasted 7 years with no end in sight. The Duke of Alba's harsh tactics turned a limited revolt into a war of independence. Spanish forces control some cities but face guerrilla warfare everywhere. The financial drain is unsustainable. Then, in November 1574, Spanish troops mutiny over unpaid wages. The Army of Flanders, Philip's most important military force, refuses to fight. This is the crisis that breaks the system. On September 1, 1575, Philip declares his second bankruptcy. He suspends all payments to the Genoese. This is not just a payment delay. This is a complete restructuring. Outstanding Asian toast totaling millions of ducats are frozen. The Genoese cannot collect, cannot enforce, cannot seize sovereign assets. They can only negotiate. But Philip has made a tactical error. The 1575 decree impacts private credit throughout Castile. The Genoese bankers financed much of their lending through credit at Castilian commercial fairs. When Philip stops paying the Genoese, they cannot pay their creditors in Castile. Those creditors cannot pay their obligations. The credit chain breaks, merchants lose their businesses, families lose their savings, the real economy collapses. This is leverage. Not financial leverage, political leverage. The 1575 bankruptcy hurts the Castilian merchant class. Those merchants pressure their cities. The cities send representatives to the Cortes. The Cortes has power Philip needs. They approve taxes. They vote on servicios special levy. Philip uses the pain in the private economy to force concessions from the cities. The strategy works. In 1577, Philip reaches a general settlement with the Genoese. The terms are brutal for Philip. Outstanding Asian toes are converted to juros at rates favorable to the bankers. New taxes are voted by the Cortes to fund the interest payments. Philip accepts this because he needs the Genoese to resume lending. Without their transfer services, his armies in Flanders cannot function. By 1580, lending resumes. The Genoese are back. The cycle continues. Within 16 years, he will default again. The trigger for 1596 is military disaster. In 1588, Philip sends the Spanish Armada against England, 130 ships, 30,000 men, the largest invasion fleet ever assembled. It fails catastrophically. Storms destroy half the fleet. English fireships scatter the rest. The survivors limp home. The cost is staggering. Not just ships and men but prestige and credit. If ever Philip needed his implicit insurance to kick in, it was 1588. A clear bad shock. Unexpected disaster. The perfect moment for bankers to provide relief. But they do not. The Genoese demand full payment, no concessions, no special terms. This proves the bankruptcies are not insurance. They are negotiated restructurings based on bargaining power, not insurance contracts based on bad luck. By 1596, Philip has more debt in arrears than the Genoese have capital, 4 to 6 million ducats overdue. The bankers refuse to advance new money until arrears are cleared. Philip's armies face mutiny again. Spanish tercios in Flanders go unpaid for months. They sack Antwerp. The Duke of Medina Sidonia writes to Philip, "Without money we cannot fight." Philip has no choice. On November 29, 1596, he declares his fourth bankruptcy. The collapse is brutal. Meet the merchants of Medina del Campo. This is Castile's financial center. The commercial fairs operate on credit. Bills of exchange connect Spain to Italy, Germany, the Netherlands. When Philip stops paying Genoese bankers in 1596, those bankers cannot honor bills at the fairs. The fairs collapse. Credit disappears. Trade ceases. Merchants who operated for decades go bankrupt overnight. Meet the juros holders. These are ordinary Castilians who bought government annuities, believing them safe. After all, they are backed by specific taxes voted by the Cortes. When Philip converts millions in Asians to new juros in 1597, the interest payments overwhelm the tax base. Existing juros holders find their payments delayed, reduced. The market value of juros falls to 70% of face value. Lifetime savings evaporate, but some people thrive. The Genoese bankers make healthy profits. Between 1566 and 1600, despite for bankruptcies, lending to Philip II is consistently profitable. The restructurings cause short-run losses, but those losses are more than offset by high returns in normal times. Ex-post rates of return, after deducting the haircuts negotiated in settlements, are proportional to the seriousness of the liquidity crisis that prompted each default. Here is the mechanism. The Genoese lend in overlapping syndicates. Families cooperate. They form a lending coalition. When Philip defaults, they collectively refuse new lending until he settles. This gives them bargaining power. Philip needs transfer services more than he needs any single loan, so he negotiates. He offers favorable terms. The bankers accept. Lending resumes. The cycle repeats. By 1598, Philip dies. He has ruled 42 years. He fought wars on 4 continents. He built the Escorial Palace. He sponsored the Counter-Reformation. He assembled the largest empire in history. And he defaulted 4 times. His son Philip III inherits the empire. And the debt. The cycle continues. Philip III defaults in 1607. Philip IV defaults in 1627, 1647, 1656. 1662. Charles II, the last Habsburg king, presides over terminal decline. By 1700, Spain is a second-rate power. The economy has collapsed, population declined, industry destroyed. The once great empire is a hollow shell, and the debt, that endless debt, remains. So what really happened? History books say Spain's bankruptcies were fiscal disasters reflecting irrational spending and hopeless finances. But that is not just wrong, it is dangerously wrong. Here is what actually happened. Spain's bankruptcies were not bugs in the system, they were features. Philip borrowed knowing he would restructure. The Genoese lent knowing they would accept haircuts. Both sides understood the game. It was sovereign debt as insurance, not as obligation. Let me break this down. Traditional lending assumes repayment. You borrow 100, you repay 105. If you cannot, you default and face punishment. Credit freezes, assets are seized, reputation destroyed. But sovereign lending is different. You cannot seize a king's castles. You cannot foreclose on a kingdom. Enforcement mechanisms do not exist. So how does lending happen at all? The answer is relationship value. Philip needs ongoing transfer services, moving money from Spain to Flanders, converting ducats to FLOs, handling bills of exchange. These services are worth more than any single loan. The Genoese provide these services. If Philip defaults opportunistically, the Genoese stop providing services. His armies cannot function, his empire collapses. That threat keeps Philip honest. Mostly, think of it like this. Imagine you run a business that depends on a supplier. The supplier extends you credit. Net 30 terms. You sometimes pay late, very late, but the supplier keeps extending credit because the ongoing business relationship is profitable. Your late payments are annoying, but not deal-breaking. That is the Philip-Genoese relationship. But here is what nobody talks about. The real profiteers were not the Genoese who lent. The real profiteers were the Genoese who managed the system. The bankers who arranged agentos earned fees on issuance, fees on transfers, fees on exchanges. They made money on the flow, not the stock. When Philip restructured, new contracts were written, more fees. When juros were issued, placement fees were charged. When taxes were collected, management fees were extracted. The bankruptcies created paperwork. Paperwork created fees. The more complex the system, the more profitable for intermediaries. The system was designed to transfer wealth from Spanish taxpayers to Genoese intermediaries. The asinto holders got restructured, but the fee collectors got paid. This was not accident. This was the business model. Now let me show you the pattern. This is the sovereign default formula. It happens every time. First, the borrowing phase. A government with regular revenue streams borrows against future income. Rates are moderate. Lending seems safe. Revenue covers interest. Debt accumulates but appears manageable. Second, the expenditure shock. War, disaster, crisis. Spending explodes beyond revenue. The government borrows more to cover the gap. Interest rates rise, but lending continues because creditors expect future repayment from eventual revenue recovery. Third, the debt trap. Revenue does recover, but not enough. Debt service consumes increasing shares of the budget. New borrowing funds interests on old borrowing. The Ponzi dynamic begins. As long as new creditors provide money, the system functions. Fourth, the liquidity crisis. Revenue shock occurs. A silver fleet delays. A tax collection disappoints. Suddenly the government cannot service short-term obligations, not because of insolvency, because of timing. Cash flow breaks. Fifth, the payment stop. The government declares inability to pay, not formal default, not bankruptcy, just suspension. Negotiations begin. Creditors demand immediate payment. The government offers restructuring. Sixth, the restructuring. Short-term debt converts to long-term obligations. Interest rates drop. Maturities extend. Principal is partly forgiven. Creditors accept because continuing the relationship is worth more than enforcing current contracts. Seventh, the resumption. New lending begins within months. The government needs money. Creditors need the relationship. Both pretend the last restructuring will be the final one, until the next crisis. The cycle repeats. This pattern repeated in Spain 13 times. It repeated in France, in Austria, in every major European power. The mechanism is universal. Now let us talk about 2025. Right now, Argentina is in the middle of its 9th sovereign default. Its 9th exactly following the Spanish pattern established 470 years ago. The numbers are devastating. Argentina owes the IMF approximately $57.2 billion as of 2025. Its central bank holds negative $9 billion in net reserves. The country is borrowing from the IMF to repay the IMF. This is the Ponzi dynamic. New debt services, old debt. In February 2025, S&P Global downgraded Argentina to selective default after forcing investors into a $65 billion debt swap. Only 17.5% of private bondholders accepted voluntarily. The rest were coerced through local law changes. Sound familiar? Let us run through the checklist. The borrowing phase. Check. Argentina borrowed heavily in the 2000s and 2010s. In 2015, Macri's government borrowed aggressively on international markets. Rates were low. Creditors assumed Argentina had reformed. Debt accumulated but seemed manageable given expected growth. The expenditure shock. Check. The COVID pandemic triggered emergency spending. The government financed it through monetary expansion. Inflation exploded to 211% in 2023. The peso collapsed. External debt became unpayable in dollar terms. The debt trap. Check. By 2020, debt service consumed so much revenue that default was inevitable. Argentina restructured $65 billion that year. But the restructuring did not solve the underlying problem. Spending still exceeds revenue. The liquidity crisis. Check. In 2024 and early 2025, Argentina faced massive debt maturities. The government could not roll over the obligations. Not enough reserves. Not enough credibility. The cash flow broke. The payments stopped. Check. The February 2025 debt swap was a forced restructuring. Argentina changed local laws to extend maturities. S&P called this distressed exchange tantamount to default. Standard playbook. Politicians are wired to spend. Borrowing is easier than taxing, easier than cutting, easier than reforming, especially when creditors keep lending despite serial default. Why change behavior if lenders keep forgiving? The IMF is wired to lend. Its mission is crisis management. It exists to prevent financial contagion. If Argentina defaults completely, it might spread to other emerging markets. So the IMF lends to prevent systemic risk, even if it means enabling serial default. Philip II understood this. He knew the Genoese would keep lending because they needed the relationship. Modern Argentinian governments know the IMF will keep lending because it needs to prevent contagion. The incentives are identical across 5 centuries, but here is what this story really teaches us. The disaster is not the default. The disaster is the wasted opportunity between defaults. Philip II had 40% of revenue from silver in peak years. He could have paid down debt, built industry, invested in productivity. Instead, he spent everything on wars. By the time his empire fell, Spain had nothing to show for 200 years of silver except debt and decline. Argentina has enormous natural resources: soybeans, beef, lithium, shale oil, and gas. It could be wealthy. Instead, every generation borrows, spends, defaults, restructures, repeats. Nothing improves. The reforms never happen. The deficits persist. The next default becomes inevitable. Every generation thinks they are different, smarter, better managed, more disciplined. Every generation learns the same lesson the hard way. You cannot borrow your way to prosperity. You cannot default your way to credibility. And you cannot resume borrowing without fundamentally changing what caused the default. The question is not whether Argentina will default again. History says it will. The question is when, and whether this generation will break the cycle or repeat it. Understanding this does not give you a crystal ball. The timing is impossible to predict. Philip defaulted in 1557, 1560, 1575, 1596, 3 years between the first two, 15 years between the last two. Argentina defaulted in 1827, 1890, 1951, 1956, 1982, 1989, 2001, 2014, 2020. The gaps vary: 11 years, 61 years, 5 years. The pattern is clear, the schedule is not. But pattern recognition is priceless. When you see a country with negative reserves borrowing from the IMF to repay the IMF, you know restructuring is coming. When you see debt service consuming 20% plus of revenue, you know sustainability is impossible. When you see forced restructurings with low voluntary participation, you know trust is gone. You cannot control sovereign behavior. You cannot force reforms. You cannot prevent default. But you can recognize the pattern before it completes. The Spanish who profited from Philip's bankruptcies were not the ones holding Asian toes at maturity. They were the ones who understood the cycle, who provided services instead of credit, who earned fees on the flow instead of betting on repayment. That lesson is 470 years old. It is timeless. Now I want to hear from you. Do you see Philip II's pattern in Argentina's ninth default? What other countries are following the serial default playbook? What am I missing? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The best analysis often comes from you, not me. If this changed how you see sovereign debt, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more economic history that actually matters. Next time, we are diving into the Fugger banking dynasty. How one family financed emperors, defaulted kings, and nearly controlled Europe before collapsing themselves. Another pattern hiding in plain sight. Another lesson they do not teach in school. Remember, history does not repeat, but it rhymes. And right now, Argentina is rhyming with Philip II. See you in the next one.